Happy Saturday, everybody, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. And recently, we have been talking about the transfer of power from King Saul, and now we've been focusing on King David. He had been anointed the king of both Israel and Judah, as we just recently talked about. And he was now unifying the entire kingdom. And one way that he did this was that he summoned up his warriors, and they went out and they fought against the Philistines. And with God's permission, they completely defeated them. And it was a great victory for them. And everybody was beginning to be really thrilled with King David. And so this brings us to kind of more of what David's going to look like as the king here. And so the first thing that he does after all of this is he brings together Israel, and they decide that they want to bring the Ark of the Covenant into their kingdom again, so that way they could worship God. Now, I don't know if you remember what we've talked about with the Ark of the Covenant, but it's probably been a while. So the Ark of the Covenant, it goes all the way back to the time of Moses in the book of Exodus. And God had kind of laid out exactly what he wanted from his people, and kind of different things that would represent that that's where the presence of God was. The Ark of the Covenant was going to be the item that God had described, that God would kind of, his presence would live in, and it would kind of be the exact symbol to the people that God was there among them. So the people and the Israelites, they would bring the Ark of the Covenant with them as they traveled like through the wilderness, as they went up to places, because that meant that physically God was with them. They were kind of carrying God with them. And so the Ark of the Covenant actually had some items in it that date back to previous stories and things like that. But the Ark of the Covenant was super symbolic for the Israelites because it meant that the presence of God was with them. And currently, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't with them. So King David wanted to take it upon himself to actually bring the presence of God back into the kingdom, whereas that hadn't happened with King Saul. But David wanted the Ark of the Covenant brought back. And so that's where we pick up in 2 Samuel chapter 6.
So this was going to be now David's way of kind of like saying, God, be part of what is the capital of where he was going to be living, where David was going to be living, and the symbol for the rest of Israel. And so then he had the people who were sort of looking over the ark at the moment, the household that had the ark, bring it with them. So they took the ark, they placed it on a cart, and they just went down the road. And so what happened was that the cart stumbled for a moment, and then this guy named Uzzah reached out to try to stabilize the ark and touch the ark, and this was a big no-no for God. God was actually enraged by Uzzah for touching what is this sacred object, the representation of God being among us. And so Uzzah dies right there because of him touching the ark. And so then when David finds out what happens, David actually gets angry. But then he gets fearful of being like, well, if Uzzah and these other guys can't take the ark, then who can? So he ends up actually ignoring it for some time. It ends up stopping kind of like around that area. But then where the ark was, the people in that area were starting to be blessed because it represented God being among his people. And David was like, okay, you know what? Let's get this straight. So there was a way to carry the ark that God wanted them to do it. So let's follow what God wants and have what is the priests, the house of the Levites, carry the ark just like God had wanted it all the way to the capital. So when they did that, now God wasn't, showing any wrath against those who were treating the ark disrespectfully. And so what David did was not only did he ask the Levites to carry the ark, but, he decided to also bring offerings and sacrifices to God for every step that the Levites were able to make. And they say that this joy that he had was so much that the ark was now coming into the capital, and it meant now that the symbol of God would be among his own people, that he decided to even dance in front of the ark, in front of everyone, showing what it is the joy to have God come to one's place.
We're talking like he didn't just dance, like he pretty much like stripped down to like nothing, because he was just completely amazed that God was going to be with them, and he was so excited that he didn't care how he looked. That what mattered to him was that God was going to be with them in their new city, in their new capital, and he didn't care how he looked. He was the king, the ruler of the people, but he knew what his place was, and that was second to God. And so he didn't care what he looked like as long as God ended up being glorified. Now, this ends up being a very short-lived moment, because soon after this, David starts making some absolutely terrible decisions. And we're going to talk about those next week and talk about what that means for King David, what that means for his relationship with God, and how we should maybe deal with some of those things. So we'll see you then.
See you.